Come, my little one. Sit here beside me, under the cherry tree. You see these petals falling around us? They look so soft, so fragile, but they are stronger than you think. I want to tell you why I never missed the first bloom of the sakura. When I was your age, Japan had lost everything. The war had ended, but there was no joy. Only silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the earth itself is holding its breath. I lived near Hiroshima. The city was gone. The air smelled of smoke and dust. The sky stayed gray for weeks. I remember walking with my mother through streets that no longer had names, past homes that no longer had doors. People moved slowly, as if afraid that even breathing too loudly might break what little was left. At night, I would lie awake and listen, not for the sound of birds or wind, but for the sound of nothing. That was the hardest part, the silence. It felt like even the gods had turned their faces away. My father did not come back from the war. My mother never spoke of it. She would sit in the corner of our small room, folding paper cranes. Every day, one more crane. 1,000 cranes, she said, could bring peace. There were no flowers then. The ground was burned, black. Even the great cherry trees, those that had watched over us for generations, were gone. Their trunks were charred, their branches broken. One morning, my mother took me to the river. She placed her hands on my shoulders and said, "Remember, Hiroshi, even when the world burns, the roots remember where to grow." I didn't understand her then. I was just a child, but her words, they stayed with me. Months passed. The seasons came and went, but the world stayed gray. People began to rebuild slowly, quietly. Men cleared rubble from the streets. Women planted seeds in the soil, even when they weren't sure anything could grow. I helped my mother collect wood from the ruins to build a small bench by what used to be our garden. There, she planted something. At first, I thought it was foolish, a tiny cherry sapling, no taller than my knee, in soil that was black and lifeless. "Why a cherry tree?" I asked her. She smiled faintly. "Because it remembers," she said. "And when it blooms again, we will too." Every day after that, I watered it with a cup of river water. Some days, I thought it would die. The leaves would wilt. The wind would bend its stem. But somehow, it kept standing. I didn't know it then, but that little tree became a promise that life could still find a way, even when everything else had forgotten how. Winter came, long and cruel. Our roof leaked. The nights were colder than anything I've ever felt. We burned scraps of wood to stay warm, but never touched the tree. "Let it sleep," my mother said. "Even the earth needs to rest." When spring returned, something small changed. The air smelled different, softer. And one morning, when I went outside, I saw it a single pink blossom trembling in the wind. It was the first flower I had seen since the war. I ran inside shouting, "Mother, Mother, it's alive." She came out, looked at it for a long time, and began to cry, not from sadness, but from something deeper. "Do you see, Hiroshi?" she whispered. "Even after fire, beauty returns." That day, the neighbors came. One by one, they stood around the tree. No one spoke. We didn't need to. That tiny blossom said everything. Years passed. The little tree grew tall, strong, and around it, the city began to live again. Houses rose where ashes had been. Children laughed in the streets again. The smell of rice and miso filled the air. Men returned to work, women reopened shops, and new schools filled with young voices. But every spring, when the cherry trees began to bloom, people would stop, even if just for a moment, and look up. Because for us, the cherry blossom wasn't just a flower. It was a reminder that life is fragile and yet unstoppable. A reminder that beauty can grow from ruin. As I grew older, I began to understand what my mother meant. The sakura was more than a tree. It was the soul of Japan. Each petal a story, each bloom a whisper of those who came before us. When I turned 18, I joined a team rebuilding a bridge across the river. One morning, as we worked, a wind blew from the hills and petals rained down like snow. We stopped, tools in hand, just watching. No one said a word, but I saw tears in the eyes of even the strongest men. We knew what it meant. It meant we had survived, and more than that, we had begun again. Now, my little one, the years have passed again. The tree in our garden, this one, right here, is a child of that first cherry tree. I planted it when your mother was born, and every year, when it blooms, I remember that day, the day the first blossom returned. People think flowers are delicate, but no, they are warriors. Quiet, gentle warriors. They remind us that no matter how dark the winter, spring always finds its way back. When I see these petals fall, I see the faces of those who didn't live to see them bloom. But I also see hope, not the loud kind, not the kind that shouts or marches, but the kind that breathes softly, like the wind through the branches. You ask me, grandfather, why do the flowers fall so quickly? And I tell you, because even short lives can be beautiful ones. So remember, my little one, when the world feels cold, when everything seems lost, look for the first blossom. It will come. It always comes. Because even after the longest winter, the flowers always return. Before I forget, promise me one thing. When I'm gone, keep watering the tree. Keep watching for the first bloom. And when you see it, whisper my name, not in sadness, but in gratitude. Because that will mean the story continues.